It is The Legend of Us, Generation movie on a Monday night. So
good evening, my friend.
I don't know if you got a chance to read it, but we're going to put it back up for a second. I just want to say that whenever you start a horror film with more than 100 years ago in a mountain village in Switzerland was a man whose strange experiments with the dead have since become legend. The legend is still told with horror the world over. It is the legend of the Curse of Frankenstein, of course, which is what we're doing tonight. But also, I was telling you, this is at the beginning of the movie, Rich. It reminded me so much of the Wizard of Oz, like just the cool beginning, like right when they're starting to play the music, a little bit of music, like like, and they're like, Frank L. Baum's books have been told the world over, and I just think it's a really good, solid introduction into the Hammer House of Horror, which is what we're doing for spooky season this year. I am, of course, weeping for Justine. You're, of course, FilmBuffOnline. Rich Drees, how is your week? How are you doing tonight? I'm excited and happy to be part of spooky season.
Happy start of spooky season. Yeah, this is I think I don't want to say Hammer is a complete blind spot for both of us. I'm in broad strokes kind of familiar with their stuff.
It's close. It is very close. Like I know I watched it with my dad, but revisiting them is really cool.
When we get to talking about the film, this is like really the first major horror film, and it just makes them so much money that it sets the studio off on a whole different business career path than they had before.
And you start doing research. It not only sets one studio up, but if you read the history and you start looking back on stuff, there's a company called Amicus Productions that also benefits greatly, and for the most part is like almost unmistakably linked to Hammer for its entire time. People are often confused, even though they're doing present day movies. But it's one of the
two guys who did the original draft of the screenplay for this eventually went off and founded Amicus on their own.
Right, because of the controversy about that script and about that draft and about everything pissed them off about this movie and the draft and everything. But we will talk about that in a moment.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Let's say hi to some people. That's the deep dive. So we say, good evening, Joe Ridgely. Good evening, gentlemen. Perfect timing. It's halftime. I know he's watching the Giants tonight. I understand. I'm okay. It's okay if you're watching the Giants. I hope they're winning. I don't know. Raider season is almost over. We're almost 5 weeks in. I'm almost done. Good evening, friends. Good evening, Ken McKernan. Happy to hear it. Ken says it's Hammer time, and then I guess you can't touch this. We can. Anyway, Ken also says I may watch a few Hammer movies this past week on Universal Monsters on Freevee. They are not everywhere. I will tell you that Vudu has a sale going on right now from October 1st. I don't know when it ends, but all of the Hammer films we'll be discussing, except for the one that we kind of have to steal should we get to it, that we will talk about it. But the three that we're definitely watching, are available on Vudu for $5. And I'm not gonna lie to you, you can do a lot worse with your $5. You can buy a bad cup of coffee. You can buy a bad cheeseburger. like $5 to get a couple Hammer films and definitive versions of both the Hammer view of Frankenstein, the Hammer view of Dracula, and one we're doing called the Horror Express, which takes our two very big Hammer stars and kind of puts them in a weird train movie. And then we also have, let's see, David Madison joining us tonight. Hi, David. Hi, gentlemen. Good to have you with us. So I'm excited because I think the Hammer films are, for anybody who talks about love of horror, think about this. The poster we showed last week, right? This is an X-rated film in 1957 when it comes out, and it's bought and it's released in Britain. X-rated, so nobody over. I read up on it, Rich, because you have to read up on these things. It replaced the X certificate replaced the H certificate, and was issued between 1951 and 1982 by the British Board of Film Censors. And basically, it was introduced as a result of a report on film censorship. And then from 1951 to 1970, it meant extremely graphic. Only those age 60 and over could be admitted. And then from 70 to 82, it was redefined as suitable for those age 18 and older. And then X was replaced in November of 1982 by the 18 certificate. So not only do we get a deep dive onto Hammer horror films, but because it's certified X in 1957, we get a brief history into the rating system of Great Britain, which is fantastic.
And honestly, and we'll dive into this a little bit deeper. When you watch this movie, there's some great moments. There's a couple of little shocks, but honestly, I feel this could air on network television without a single trim.
Yeah, there's nothing. I mean,
which just goes to illustrate
how far we've come. Well, it's really interesting. It really does show how far we come. This is considered one of the goriest films of the 50s and 60s. And I'm going to admit this on our film show tonight. I have not seen Terrifier or Terrifier 2. I just haven't gotten around to it. I don't want to. I'm not holding any disdain for them or anything. But I watched Terrifier the other night, and the idea that they're both horror films and they both have some sort of rating to them is all that they have in common. Gore wise, because the gore is so extensive in Terrifier, but we'll get to that. But this is the movie that actually was in color, allowed the gore to happen. You had brains and all kinds of things simmering around in a pot and doing all kinds of whatever that viscous pink fluid is. It literally could be the fluid from Ghostbusters 2. I don't know, but it's bubbling in every one of his canisters. You know what I mean? I'm sure it's probably just soap or something, but it's the movie that actually let gore into horror cinema, back into horror cinema, and started it on a trajectory. But let's start with the news first. One of the things that's happening, Rich, and we're going to get to a major return in a moment, but the first thing I'm going to say is we've had significant SAG-AFTRA and AMPTP talks today, and they're going to meet again on Wednesday. So, Rich, I will say this with you. Fingers crossed we get the WGA strike is over, but the SAG strike is not. So let's fingers crossed.
If it were to end by the end of this week, and they say, okay, strike is over while we, do our ratification vote and everything, I would say maybe there would be an outside chance of actors being able to appear at New York Comic Con the following weekend, which is on the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, which would be great because I'm kind of scrambling around looking at stuff going, okay, Rennie Harlan's doing a panel on this thing that no one's ever heard of. Trying to find, 2 or 3 things to cover.
Get him a cliffhanger question and a cutthroat island question.
What was worse, being in director's jail or being in actual jail?
But I think,
and if you don't know why Rennie Harlan was in jail, look it up. I'm not going to go through that.
Look it up. Yeah, we're not going to talk about it, but I think the fingers are crossed. Also, I think it's going to be my question, as always the case, is will movies move back into their slots? Nothing moved into the slot that Dune was going to immediately take. So if we get a SAG contract that's solid, maybe some of the movies move back that were moved out of the November range, because March looks like a fucking mess, Rich. March looks like the early portions of this summer where everything was dropped on top of each other, and it's just going to get real messy and real expensive if we don't actually fix it and move things around better.
The problem here is you're talking about getting Timothée Chalamet out to do promotion for that for Dune if they move it back into November or maybe at some point in December. The problem there though is he may be halfway through shooting something else, and depending on how the contracts work, whoever has first call on his services depending on when those contracts were signed. He might have to be on set for these things, and then it's getting everything back in order is going to be a colossal clusterfuck.
I thought you were going to say something else. I thought you were going to say, what if he's going to get on Colbert or get on the Tonight Show or whatever, but is he going to promote Dune or Wonka? And both. And that's the rub of screwing around with your creators and your creatives. But forget about bad news. Let's talk about a significant piece of good news that Film Buff Online was gracious enough to have an article about. I am of course talking about the return of Hattie McDaniel's Oscar.
Oh, yes, we had that last week. Yes.
Yes.
We'll get to that one too.
We'll get to that tomorrow morning's thing. We'll get to, but
yeah,
let's talk about that.
Okay, for the uninitiated, Hattie McDaniel played Mammy in Gone with the Wind. First Black actress to be nominated for an Academy Award. In the best
one of the more significant wins in the history of the Academy.
And then she won, and of course, because the Coconut Grove was segregated at the time of, and that's where they held the Oscars ceremony that year. She and her escort and her white manager had to sit off at a table to the side. That it was like a favor to the Academy that she was even allowed in the door, which unfortunately speaks to the tenor of the times. She, was very grateful. It was a great historical moment. Her entire Oscar speech was maybe 35 seconds. Is available to watch online on YouTube on the Academy's YouTube channel.
It's a great speech and it's a fantastic performance. So it's it's well
when
deserved.
She passed away, about 10, 12 years later, she willed her Oscar, which for at the time supporting actor and actresses got a plaque with like an outline of an Oscar and then
the Oscar shape on it. It's a wonky.
Yeah,
it looks wonky.
It's they wouldn't get an Oscar statue until like the mid 50s was when that changed. But she willed her Oscar plaque to Howard University in Washington, D.C., a historical Black college and university. And it sat in there on display in their theater, their drama department for years. Yes. Felice Rashad has talked about, seeing it when she would go to her drama classes and being, moved by it. Other actors have talked about seeing it there as well. And then sometime, and no one's exactly sure, which is weird to me, in the late 60s, early 70s, it just disappeared. No one knows what happened to it. There's a number of theories. At the time, we had, some racial unrest on campus. So it's thought maybe a professor took it off of display to put it somewhere because there was some negative feelings about the Mammy character and her performance. And some people just saw it as a demeaning stereotype and not a subversion of those stereotypes.
Yeah, because the performance, and it should be noted, the performance is actually, it's her making fun of the Mammy character. Like, the performance within the performance is that she is literally making fun of Scarlett. You can see it, and it's very present. If you haven't seen the movie, it's omnipresent, and it's so subversive that, like, one, they got away with it, and two, she was smart enough to pull it off and get it like to the point where she could make fun of this incredibly horrible stereotype. But it disappears. Poof. Nobody knows where. Nobody knows when.
So maybe it was taken to, be safeguarded. Maybe it was taken by a student protester who didn't understand what they had or what she was actually doing with the role. They just saw it. They just saw it as, demeaning. So they took it and, just destroyed it, threw it in the Potomac, what have you. Maybe somebody just flat out stole it and sold it to a collector, and it's just been floating around on the sly in somebody's collection for, the last 50 years. No one knows.
Maybe it's the gold in the briefcase in Pulp Fiction. I mean, it could be anything.
Yeah, but So, starting around, I think it was about 2005, the school reached out to the Academy and said, "Hey, can we get a replacement for this? It was willed to us. We were the owners. It's gone. Enough time has passed that we really don't feel we have a significant chance of recovering it, but we would like it, to continue to fulfill the wishes of her
generations."
Yes, to inspire generations. And the Academy said, "Nope, we don't do that." Now,
we're assholes. We don't do that.
That has not always been the Academy's policy, though. Remember back when Orson Welles passed away, his daughter Beatrice couldn't find the Academy Award he won for co-writing Citizen Kane, and she looked around, and Orson was a little casual with the thing, to be quite honest. And so finally, she was like, "Okay, it's lost somewhere, in the last couple of years of his life when he was couch surfing, from Peter Bogdanovich's place to somewhere else and what have you." And so the Academy was like, "Yeah, sure, here's a replacement Oscar." And then about 4 years after that, somebody pops up and says, "Oh no, I have the original Oscar," and they tried to put it on up for auction, and that became a whole big legal battle. The Academy got drawn into that mess, and I have to wonder. I haven't been able to find any actual corroboration, but I have to wonder if, because of the Orson Welles Oscar replacement mess, which is still ongoing because somebody just tried to auction off the
there was another auction this past summer.
The replacement Oscar, and I got an email after I ran the story telling me from the owner saying, "Oh no, I think that was stolen from me." So I've been trying to get back in touch with this guy. But to get back to my point, so I think the Academy changed their policy and then said in 2005, "We don't do that anymore because fuck it, we don't want to go through that mess." And then finally, there was some more pressure on the Academy, and then actually it was today they had the ceremony where they replaced it in the I want to get this name right here. Hold on just a second. The crap, where is it? Can't find it in my own stupid story I wrote. It's okay, here it is. The Chadwick A. Boseman College of Fine Arts at Howard University.
Yeah, so Boseman's name was put on the place when he passed away. He, of course, being one of their primary shining stars from the program.
Mm-hmm.
So long story short, they did finally replace it, but they were basically protecting themselves from having the same kind of crazy that went on with Orson Welles' Oscar, which is fascinating. It is a fascinating, first off, that Orson Welles kind of lost his Oscar, and secondly, that there are 2-3 people out there with an Orson Welles Oscar somewhere that are saying that other people stole them. But this is a great story because it was kind of like one of those things that was lost to time. And I'm wondering now that it's been replaced, if we're going to hear the original, maybe. And Rich, I still think we need to do a show at some point of Generation Movie where we talk about the great thievery things that have happened to famous, because I was thinking about this reminded me so much of the story about Dorothy's shoes. You know what I mean? Just
the Spy Who Loved Me car.
The Spy Who Loves Me car. Crazy
which was
shit.
Stolen and I never mind. I won't say a theory that somebody told me because they might not have. I'm certainly not going to name who that was.
Finding the person that found Bruce the shark sitting in a fucking dumpster at a fucking automotive place. You know what I mean? At a junkyard. It's just one of the but it's so important for the heritage and so important for the
and just a cap on this to commemorate that it had been lost. When they built the Academy Museum, there's one room where they have different Oscars on display. There was always, and it's going to remain, an empty alcove in the wall with, you know, a plaque talking about Hattie McDaniel's accomplishment, but it's going to remain empty to signify the loss of that original Oscar, which I think is very a very beautiful idea.
Well, and also it brings, for me, when you do something like that, it brings buzz to an area, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going through this place that has Oscars and all kinds of things that they've gotten back, and one doesn't have it, the one that's most important is the one that doesn't have it. And that's how movie history works. Let's see, we got a comment from somebody. Hey, brothers. Hey, Sean. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you. And everybody else, we're losing to football. I don't care. Giants, Seahawks, nobody gives a shit. Except Joe. But now we have to talk.
Next year for the fall, we're doing football movies, I guess.
Football movie. Yeah, maybe. That might work. I think we do that in September. What's the story you got planned for tomorrow from Film Buff?
Oh, this is an exciting one, as I am a huge, obviously, if you know me, you know I'm a huge British comedy nerd.
You're a huge sketch comedy nerd in general.
Well, and sketch comedy. You know, it's kind of these are the two. This is the Venn diagram, really. But leading up to the formation of Monty Python, the guys from the group were in various other TV shows, like At Last, the 1948 show, Do Not Adjust Your Set, We Have Ways of Making You Laugh, and they were slowly kind of moving towards, you know, because they were from a couple different colleges, and so they were slowly kind of moving towards each other until they, you know, saw each other's work and formed Monty Python. Yes. The last of the pre-Python shows was called The Complete and Utter History of Britain. It was written and starred Michael Palin and Terry Jones, and it was a 6-episode series that ran from January and February of 1969. This was not a BBC production. I think this was ITV or one. Yeah, it was ITV, and somewhere along the lines, ITV ran basically tossed it all out, with the exception of like the first 2 episodes, and people were like shocked because, you know, it was like, this is like one of the last things before Python, and from all accounts it was fairly funny. But today they announced recently as they were doing a complete top to bottom inventory of all of ITV's archive holdings, you know, literally pulling out every tape, every film canister, and, you know, starting it and not trusting what's on the label, but just, you know, double checking everything that they own. They have discovered they did have copies of those other 4 episodes that for 50 years or so now have been thought to have been lost. To me, this is super exciting. And they discovered it, you know, earlier in the year, cleaned them up. They're available now on, I think, let me just double check it, on ITVX Premium, which is a British streaming service. And I think it's coming to BritBox also. So well, I don't have it.
The reason for the excitement is twofold. One, it's excitement because we're going to see Monty Python before they're Monty Python. And 2, when they discover things like this, indubitably they actually find other things.
Yes.
And you're always on the lookout for, you know, it's like that scene in The Lost Boys when he's like, I'm always looking for Batman comic number 6 or whatever the one that he wants to find, and he's like, I'm always looking for the other 3 or whatever because he already has 2. It's always indubitably
to be fair. There are some missing episodes from those other shows that I mentioned. Do Not Adjust Your Set is missing its entire 2nd series with the exception of 1 episode. There's like 2 episodes missing from At Last, the 1948 show. What kills me, We Have Ways of Making You Laugh, which was Eric Idle and Terry Gilliam basically developing the animation style he's going to use in Python. All 24 episodes of that are gone. Just boom, vanished. And so if you're always interested in the history of these things and how they develop, you know, Python didn't just happen. There was like a successive amount of series that led to it. And to see these things kind of, you know, that vanishing history when it's so recent is heartbreaking. You know, I can understand, you know, stuff disappearing that was in the Library of Alexandria, for goodness sakes. But, you know, I think it was kind of
somebody spilling a soda on a bunch of tapes from the 60s or 70s
yeah.
is the most depressing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to in Britain. I think a lot of the acting contracts with British Equity, which is their actors union, had no provisions for allowing these shows to be rerun after like an initial run and maybe one extra rerun.
This is
They
good
didn't have
news.
the idea of foreign markets. They didn't have this idea until 71, when Python started to become big, and then they took that over to the US, and then they discovered, oh crap, we can be making money off of this stuff. You know, and so equity contracts changed, and so did the attitude towards preserving a lot of this stuff. But, you know, as a Doctor Who fan, you hear those stories of, you know, so much of the
Fingers
first two
crossed.
Doctors stuff was wiped, and then slowly but surely around the world, somebody pops up and goes, oh, we have a copy of, you know, The Underwater Menace Part 2. And he's like, yay, that's back.
Well,
and then, you know,
it's interesting you're talking about this, because a lot of, like, when you're looking through, when we were trying to pick Hammer stuff to sink our teeth into, right? A lot of the ones I wanted, there was the Abominable Snowman one, the Abominable Snow Beast, whatever the fuck that is not available. And that was the one
being lost. That's just a case of no one putting it out right now.
Right, but it's kind of tied together. Yeah, it's frustrating. But you know what is available? And we're gonna get to it right now.
Here we go. Here's the segue.
Yeah, they're good. It was a good segue. Curse of Frankenstein. No one who saw it lived to describe it. Eastman color. Peter Cushing as Baron Victor Frankenstein. Christopher Lee as the creature. And it is, the production of this is the beginnings, like we were talking about, right? The production is not only the beginning of one company, it's the beginning of two. Because, like, and then others, and then a redesign. Before we get to production, I do want to say, because I keep on forgetting to do it, and I want to make sure we get it in. If you like our show, if you like everything about our show, if you decide to watch our show, and you want to check us out,
one or two things about it.
Yeah, or like, Rich or me, or you like us separately or together. But we have our YouTube channel. Please check it out on the Indie Escape Network. All of our shows are there, and like it's a real testament to how much work we put in on the show. But we also have the Facebook thing, so we have both of those things going. So our production isn't as important as the production of Hammer Studios. But one of the things I want to talk about, Rich, is this dueling. Like, when we do this show, I always find the most interesting little tidbits. And I think the most fantastic thing, and we kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, Amicus Productions actually gets made from this screenplay that bounces around. There's a basically, Max Rosenberg is originally produced by Michael Carreras at Hammer Films with a deal to produce Frankenstein the Monster, right? And then Rosenberg says it was my idea. But there's a script by Milton Subotsky. And basically what happens is both Subotsky and Rosenberg are eventually cut out of the thing. They're cut out of profit participation, and they only make $5,000 fee for bringing the production to Hammer. Subotsky and Rosenberg get so pissed off about this that they start Amicus Films, and so out of rivalry, a studio is born. And that's, like, we're going to talk about a legacy with Hammer Horror Films and what it meant to everybody making horror films. But the most fascinating thing here is you basically have two guys that were out scouting scripts and getting specs, and they basically get totally, like, I don't want to say screwed over, because things like this happens all the time, but basically they get passed over, and then they start their own production company. The screenwriter ends up being Jimmy Sangster, and basically he comes up with the idea that he's going to adapt Mary Shelley's novel, almost like trying to do it as close as possible. And he claims that he never knew anything about Rosenberg's involvement or the treatment, or he never saw it or anything. He had worked as a production manager, and basically, he basically made the budget and the script into the same thing. So he's a guy who's writing a screenplay, and you are, as you and people on our network know about, like, making indie films, you write your screenplay sometimes knowing what you can get done. And I think that's a real interesting aspect of this, because he was in charge of the purse strings on a lot of stuff. He made a screenplay that it's tight, it's economical, it's an hour and 23 minutes. It gets all of the major things that you need to get across. And basically, like, one of the things it doesn't have, and one of the things he always talked about, I don't need a bunch of people storming the castle with pitchforks. That would cost too much money to do. I wanted to make it a personal story. He makes it about Victor and about his friend Paul and about Justine and about Elizabeth and the monster. He makes it about everybody. So
it's very much more of a drama than it is a pell-mell horror movie or a monster movie. We don't feel, like you said,
it's very much got Prometheus. It's very much got Prometheus on the brain. The idea of, taking something that's dead and making it living. But I think that's really interesting. And when you have a guy that's in charge of the purse strings for everything, he comes in and says, I adapted it in the book the way we could afford it and the way I saw it. Right. And one of the interviews he gave with a film historian named Jonathan Rigby was he had never seen the Frankenstein film at Universal. So he, like, when you read that and you understand that, and then you see this movie, there are pieces of it that it doesn't look like Universal's at all.
Yeah. Terrence Fisher also said, the director of this film said, they offered me to watch, the other. He's like, no, I don't want to know that what they did. I want to approach it, on my own. And I think it's very much a Gothic story, much more so than I think than the Universal version. I think the Universal version is a great mad scientist story. They both do dabble in the thematic question of tampering in God's domain, as it were. But
this one seems grimy. Like, this one seems go into some guy who's doing bodies and buying some eyeballs. You know what I mean? Like, just I think the Gothic nature of it is so much more pronounced than the Frankenstein from the universe. And I love Frankenstein. I love Boris Karloff as Frankenstein. It's a fantastic makeup job. I love the makeup effects here, but the production, they don't have a lot of trouble, and they don't realize, Rich, and when you're sometimes on the cusp of greatness, you don't actually realize what you're doing, right? Like, you don't, you just do it. And so they get Peter Cushing, and basically they secured him away from television, and this is Peter Cushing, who will go on to be the one of two biggest stars in the history of Hammer. Peter Cushing comes in, and him and Christopher Lee are going to be running this, like, not running this company, but the go-to stars for this company.
True. And you have to remember, though, because of the Universal thing, originally when Hammer was thinking of doing a Frankenstein movie, it was going to be in black and white. They were going to have Boris Karloff come in as the monster, and Karloff didn't want to do it. Universal starts shrieking about, they're going, if you do anything, okay, the novel is public domain, but if you do anything that, is an original idea from us, we're going to sue your ass into oblivion. Hammer actually took out an insurance policy that said if we got sued, the insurance company would pay up to $3 million if we lost any kind of insurance, any kind of copyright infringement lawsuit. So yeah, so they were, they kind of knew they had to go in a different way. And I think, what they did was they played to Hammer's strengths of doing period dramas and stuff at the time. And
yeah, the movie looks beautiful. The outfit, the costume design is incredible. I was also surprised in reading through the credits how many women are involved with this production. In 1957, there are a lot of women that are part of this production and this entire endeavor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the other things that comes up is, and this has to be talked about before we jump into the next portion, right? They spend £65,000 in November of 1956 on this movie. That's the entire budget, £65,000. And we're going to talk about this for a moment because there's no decided numbers on it, just rumor and innuendo about what happened and the box office, right? But they spent a lot of money. It looks glorious for a movie that only cost £65,000 in 1957.
And it is the first color movie that Hammer did. I'm sorry, the British horror film to be done in color, and that's
to be done in color. And I was telling you, I thought, as I'm watching the movie and I'm reliving it, I swear to God, there's a first time where Peter Cushing's playing with the body, and he has a knife, and he's cutting, and there's blood, and I swear to God, somebody said, "Yeah, just wipe it right here, going down your jacket," because they really want to get the blood across. And the gunshot, I think the gunshot is solid. There's a gunshot in the middle of the movie that looks absolutely stunning, not just from Christopher Lee's reaction to it, but the blood, like the blood spurting, and just like it looks great.
Yeah.
But £65,000, we're going to get to that in a moment, because I'm going to have to do some math, because again, there's no real figures from 1957 that you can figure. But the rumors of the box office of this movie, Rich, are mind-numbingly wonderfully astounding. Okay? So it is rumored that this movie, basically, original box office in the UK is about $1.9 million. It then basically starts making money all over the world at a time when movies weren't making money all over the world. And then it eventually goes to the US and it plays at the Paramount Theater on Broadway. And Variety reports Curse made $72,000 and noted it the Paramount flagship, its biggest opening week on straight film policy in the last 2 years. Variety continued to be impressed with the box office numbers on the movie across the U.S. Like, they would make stories about it, and there are rumors that it grossed 70 times its budget. So, that's not a lot of money now, right? You look up and you go, that's not a lot of money where you go, oh my God, that's incredible. But 70 times its budget. We've been on here talking about movies for a long time, Rich. We have a lot of movies that don't make half their budget, especially movies that are coming out now. When you have a movie, you know what I mean? Like, you have movies that are struggling to make any kind of ends meet. 70 times its budget, Rich. 70, like 70. That's and again, it doesn't sound like a lot, but in 1957, if you're making 7 times your budget, you're talking about basically a blockbuster like no other.
True.
And it sets the company up. It absolutely sets the company up to be a foundation. It sets a foundation for the company, and it also sets up the idea that this is going to be a worldwide audience for these movies, which, horror is one of the easiest movies to translate in any language. Scary is scary is scary,
Yeah.
right? And so the idea that you could make a movie, and like I said, it grossed, you know, it grossed 1.9 in the UK. Then it goes to, other things said it went to, made another 300,000 in its first year in Britain, so like 2.2 million, and then it goes to Japan and makes another 500,000 pounds. These are astounding numbers in 1957. This is something.
Oh, I know.
And when you think about Village Road shows or anything where it basically played a week in a theater, then it moved to another theater, it was grossing, whatever theater got this movie in 1957, 58, 59, had the biggest week of its year. And that is something that can be said because very rarely do American theaters love something foreign. I don't mean that disrespectfully to anything.
Well, there was some of the U.S. investors were a little concerned about this cast of British no names, and are their accents going to be too thick? That was a concern. And then basically the studio said, look, we only have 1,250 pounds budgeted for our lead actor. If you can get an American actor who can, wants to do this role for, that pittance, we'll cast him. But, so they were like, okay, go ahead. And they're like, don't worry, the accents won't be too thick.
Actually, Cushing is fantastic. Cushing is so, he's so amazing. Couple comments. Hold on, we got some comments as we're talking about. Hello, everyone. Hello, Molly Zombie. Good to see you.
Molly.
And some of the guys are legends in the Star Wars universe. I know you're getting there. We'll get there. Relax. We'll get the legacy. But
oh boy, will
the idea that they're both in the Star Wars universe, it's not lost on me that somewhere George Lucas was sitting in a theater in 1957 or 58 and said someday I would like to work with those guys. But we'll talk about that.
Okay. Now, while we have been talking, I did crunch the numbers. I converted 65,000 pounds for inflation, and then converted that to
glad
US
you
dollars.
did it because I'm not good at I'm bad at math.
This movie cost, in today's standard, $1.55 million, a little over $1.5 million to make.
What's the gross? What's the gross? What's the gross there? Numbers, man.
And so what was it? 70 times?
70 times. So it's $70 million?
No, well, no, because you have the half, so it's going to be about $108 million.
So a little under whatever was the 10th highest grossing movie of this summer, $108 million. And we're not like dealing with inflation or anything. That's an astounding amount of money.
Yeah, that's what it would be today.
It's just incredible.
Yeah. I would love to take $1.5 million, make a movie and come back with $108 million.
And that's, but you also realize, like, Warner Brothers is now selling them every year. And although I will say you can't find them on Max this year, which is the first year I've noticed. I can't find anything on Max, and that's a direct dig. There's so much fucking reality shows and shows about somebody building a house. I can't find anything, but I really couldn't find them this year.
And outside of everybody in the world who could have seen this coming.
Except you and I and everyone else that talks to the man. But so it's an incredible amount of money. It's an incredible testament to the staying power of the movie. It's only 83 minutes, Rich. It moves fast. It's got a great script. I was thinking about it today. I don't know of any movie that I can remember where scruples is used properly in a sentence in a movie, which I found really funny. And it's a great line too. It's like, you haven't had any scruples for the last 6 months. Why are you getting them now? And I was thinking to myself, he's not wrong. Paul's been waking up puppy dogs, doing all kinds of shit.
Two things about the romance angles in this movie that kind of gave me pause. The first, Elizabeth, his fiance, also
is his cousin.
His cousin.
And also, there's just a creepy, like, there's a sequence at the beginning of the movie when he's a kid where Elizabeth, her mother, is basically begging for funding that Victor's mom has provided her since she like hit the poorhouse. And so Victor's like, yeah, and then all of a sudden the woman is just 20 years later, beautiful, played by Hazel Court, delivered to the door as some sort of, she's gonna live here and I'm gonna
Here's your
marry
tribute.
her as a tribute. It's
Yeah.
creepy as fuck.
And the other thing that kind of surprised me was Victor cheating on her with the maid, which just that kind of infidelity plot line you haven't seen really, that kind of extra layer of the relationships going on here. You hadn't seen before. And I really like that.
It's got a very upstairs downstairs feel to it. Right? Yeah.
I'm sorry to see, I mean, Valerie Gaunt, who plays the maid Justine, she only ever did 4 things. She was in 2 TV shows, Dixon and Doc Green, which is a long-running, well-known British police procedural from the 50s. And then she did Curse of Frankenstein, and then she'll show up in our next film. And then that's it. That's the end of her career. I'm not sure why.
We're gonna have to look into her maybe for the next week. But what I will say to you is, if you can find a better side eye in a film than the moment Elizabeth arrives and Justine has to carry her bags, and Victor is talking about how Elizabeth is moving in, and Justine is just carrying the bags, kind of like. If there is a better side eye to a guy that's cheating on everybody with the maid, I don't know that it's feasible. I don't know, because it's fantastic. It's like in a Frankenstein movie, it's probably a meaningless scene, but I got to tell you, I was really paying attention to her because it gets dropped on her that the lady's moving in, gets dropped on her that Victor's going to marry her. It gets dropped on her all in one time, and she's carrying the bags, so she's got a whole lot to unpack, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just great. The box office is astounding. We get to the critical response then and now. And I think one of the things you look at, we always use Rotten Tomatoes. It's a great way to kind of gauge where things are. It's 82% on Rotten Tomatoes for the critics, 77% for the audience score, which means there's a consensus here, right?
I would dare say, though, that Rotten Tomatoes score would have been a lot lower had Rotten Tomatoes existed in the 50s.
Well, I think in the 50s, the critical response is, this is garbage. It's super gory. I can't believe we've sunk to this new low. And I would say those poor people, I would say, let's take them to see Terrifier, because those poor people won't know what their head will explode. But like the reviews, it was probably lower in the 50s. I would agree. I tend to go back and look at some of the older reviews of like older people. Unaccountably a box office sensation, this plotting and distasteful horror melodrama from Britain only has a few really eerie moments. Okay, sure. That sounds like a bad review. What I'm going to say to you is, I think if you're going to make a Frankenstein movie, and to be honest, Rich, we're going to get to Legacy in a moment. Can you remember the last time we've had a good one?
No.
Like as I was watching this one, I was paying attention. The sets are nice, and the sets are incredible. It's not super gory. It's not, of course, what it could be if you're making it presently. But the performances are like, Cushing is, I actually think, looking at it, he is the Victor Frankenstein we all want and need, and just his performance is so bone-chillingly awful, like where he's just an awful human being,
Oh yeah,
and he's just so distasteful and also incredibly just cold and just get me to the next fix where I feel like a god.
Yeah,
It's tremendous.
I have two different reviews here. I wanted to quote out. Okay, the first one is from the Tribune, the London Tribune, I'm assuming. Okay, kind of is headlined with for all lovers of cinema, only two words describe this film: depressing, degrading. As a society, we have abolished.
What's the date? Wait, what's the date on this?
10th of May, 1957.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, so go. As a society, we have abolished public torture and hanging, flogging at the cart tail, and bear baiting. Only a privileged pocket of traditional savagery defends the torment of animals in the hunting field. But in the cinema, there are those who find it profitable to keep alive in people, and especially one feels in the case of children, primitive fears and cruelties. The logical development of this kind of thing is a peep show of freaks interspersed with visits to a torture chamber. Which doesn't sound too bad to me, but he meant this as a negative.
I'm all about freaks going to a torture chamber.
And
I feel like, can we have a movie that isn't freaks going to a torture chamber? This, like, in this day and age, like wow, that is a scathing review.
Mm-hmm. Now, and I also have this review here from Variety from just a couple of days later. Peter Cushing gets every inch of drama from the leading role, making almost believable the ambitious urge and diabolical accomplishment. Melvin Hayes as the child skillfully conveys the ruthless self-possession of the embryo man. Valerie Gaunt is vibrantly attractive as the Baron's discarded mistress, while Christopher Lee arouses more of pity than horror in his interpretation of the creature. So it sounds like Variety, at least, was kind of not getting on a moral high horse about it and was meeting with the intentions of what the filmmakers had.
Well, that's an interesting take, because he's not an angry monster, especially the second go around where the second sequence with Paul and Victor and Christopher Lee playing the creature is absolutely, like, we're going to talk about in the Legacy in a moment, but it is absolutely horrific the way Victor treats him. So I think that's a really good review from Variety. Also, leave it to the goddamn Americans to lower tastes and just enjoy the shit out of a good horror film. I think what I came out of it going was, I came out of it going that this should be the movie that, if you want to make a reinterpretation, and there are boiling things around, there are a lot of little things bubbling about upcoming Frankenstein interpretations, Bride of Frankenstein interpretations, all kind of bubbling around filmmakers and different actors and actresses. The Gyllenhaals have their hands in one of them. This is the one you should look at. Like, this is the one you should, like, you long to get a Victor that is this good. You long to get a creature that is this sympathetic, and also at times Christopher Lee is so goddamn big that he's so fucking tall and so, like, just angles, and just like that first time Paul hits him with a chair and you don't think he's actually going down, and then he clumps. Like, it's fantastic. I think this is the version you go to when you want to try to recreate a gothic horror film, and I think so many people have seen it, and all I want to talk about is the movies that they've, like, the movie I was immediately thinking about watching this movie, and the movie I couldn't get out of my head, and a movie that's kind of got a revival going on Netflix. We'll get to Legacy. Hold on, we'll just go right to Legacy. Fuck it. We're daring. We're professionals. The movie I immediately thought of was Crimson Peak, because I feel Guillermo del Toro at some point watched this movie over and over again, and I feel Crimson Peak. Sure. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there are a lot of movies that, that owe this film so much, but I think the performances are what sets it apart. Like, because think about it, they found Cushing and Lee, and then they had nothing but success. You know what I mean? Like, and then and they switch. Like, one of the most interesting things about the legacy and the franchise viability that you have to look at is that they did the opposite of Universal, because Universal released Dracula, then Frankenstein. Hammer goes on it and releases Frankenstein, then Dracula. And the idea that Christopher Lee is playing this 6-foot creature, and then all of a sudden he gets to sink his fangs into something else, which we'll talk about in a moment. It's incredible. The idea that the legacy you get from this movie is how things look, like, and how they feel, and the sets. I was blown away by the production design, Rich, that I think every low budget gothic horror film should try to steal. The set should be stolen. It's like, pick your movie.
It doesn't rely on a lot of the strict Eric von Strickfaden designed and built electricity generators and sparks machines and all that stuff of the Universal stuff. This feels like a much more earthier version of science, with a lot of bubbly stuff in beakers and test tubes and coily glass tubes and all that
water.
other stuff. Yeah.
Well, and like, I think one of the more interesting things, we have a lot of Rocky Horror fans. Well, I'm a Rocky Horror fan. Rocky Horror gets it directly from this.
Oh my God, yeah.
Rocky's the tank and the water, and just the immersion in the water with like the fucking bandages. It is right out of this fucking movie, Rich.
Oh God,
which is and like, then you realize, Richard O'Brien grew up in the 50s and 60s, and he, 20 years later he makes Rocky Horror. But it's frightening when you see it and you go, oh, that dog in the water, it's going to be a bigger chamber. And then you look up and I think Mel Brooks got a kick out of this. It's like, what if we hit a brain off a wall? Because the fight with the brain is one of the funniest parts of the movie. It's great. So like, all of a sudden young Frankenstein takes the Universal stuff and just and basically does it well. But it doesn't have anything to do with this. Where you look at it, it feels gothic. It looks gothic. The performances are really good.
Yeah, this is its own universe without being beholden to anything. And I mean, legally, they kind of had to do it that way anyways. But I have a feeling that even if that wasn't a consideration, we still would have gotten this movie pretty much exactly as it is.
I think we would have too. And I think the legacy, another interesting side legacy, right? How many, if you got a chance to talk to any of the horror filmmakers that are making movies, how many would talk about the Hammer style of films as movies that they really wanted to be part of, wanted a hand in, because they have such a different look from the traditional Universal horror films. This particular franchise and this particular legacy cuts through everything. And this is, I'm going to make a big DNA thing. Everybody goes to see Terrifier 2, and everybody's talking about how gory it is and whatever. But realize that the reaction to Terrifier 2 is the same reaction that this movie gets in 1957.
Yes.
The blood on the thing, the brain, playing with brains, making dogs come to life and all kinds of weird shit. The fucking gunshot, killing a blind guy in the middle of the field. I love that switch, by the way. The homage to Universal, but and that's the other thing. What's great about it? God,
I was gonna say, and the blind guy's out with his grandson. Grandson goes immediately over to find something by the lake, leaving him alone. And I'm just sitting there going, I don't think there's a great track record in Frankenstein movies for kids near bodies of water. Maybe you want to move, kid. And we never do find out if the kid died or not, being attacked by the monster. I think maybe they just don't show it.
That's the great moment where you realize Victor's a total douchebag. The monster has escaped. Paul has said, we'll alert the authorities, then we'll go looking for the monster. Victor says, sure. Then goes out, and they go chasing the monster down. And we know he's already killed the old blind guy, possibly the kid, because we never see the kid again. And then Victor's like, "Oh, I never alerted the authorities."
Yeah, nah.
What if we like? And Paul's like, "What if we hadn't been able to stop it?" But this performance, I think gives you a great retrospective into everything that is right about a horror villain. Like, because
Mm-hmm.
Cushing is a full-on horror villain. There's nothing good about him, and the more he just sways into the, like, even as Paul's trying to save him, like, hey, just stop doing your shit. We can work, like, the stuff you've done is amazing. We can save so many lives. I don't want to save lives. That's that's beneath me. So every great horror villain that has a great plan where somebody goes, once you pass this line, owes it to this movie. You know what I mean? And I know we have horror villains that do that shit all the time, but this is one of the few times when you can actually watch the wheels turning where he's like, I don't give a shit about any of that other stuff. I want this to be like, I'm trying to do something perfect. And the scene with the, like, another legacy thing that I was thinking about, can you not see Day of the Dead, right? Day of the Dead, one of the great zombie movies. There's a character named Bub. He's great. He's
Mm-hmm.
basically the under. If you haven't seen it, the underground facility is basically working on making the dead kind of remember their past lives. So Bub is given a razor, and he's kind of like doing all these things, but he's continuously collared, and the people watching him are military people who are super cruel, and eventually he breaks out and does what he's going to do.
Yeah.
But if you don't think about Bub while watching the second sequence with Victor Frankenstein and Christopher Lee in The Creature, where he's telling him to stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down, and he's just barking orders at him, and he's kind of like frightened, and he's just like, "Ugh." You know what I mean? Like, and then
Yeah.
it's just if you don't see it, I can't. The DNA is there,
I mean, yeah.
which leads me to
I
believe that
think.
Romero probably saw this too. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Oh yeah. I mean, obviously, the biggest legacy of this is it entirely changed Hammer Studios' kind of business model, and they were suddenly all in. They had studios coming left, right, and center. Columbia came forward and gave them a deal for 3 horror movies a year, and that's what they made, and that's what they made their big bread and butter on, and that's ultimately what they're known for now. Um,
They
I
have
mean, and
so
even
many
just
so many
as
movies.
as we talk about franchise viability, in the next 17 years, they make another 6 of these Frankenstein movies, all interconnected. They're not like remakes. They all kind of have a long line of continuity between them. I mean, starting right here at the end of this movie, we see the blade of the guillotine going up, but we never see it
Yeah.
come down. So I don't know. I doubt they were thinking sequel already at that moment, but they inadvertently allowed themselves to that out to
Well,
have go forward.
The Hammer films kind of like, it's interesting you mentioned the Hammer films do kind of have like a continuity to them that is not unsimilar than a Star Wars continuity or a Marvel continuity. Because once the
Well,
studio got up and running, and once they started like just being able to set everything in place, they kind of churned it out, like where they're just
mhm.
making
But
money hand over fist.
and it's funny you mentioned uh, Marvel and Star Wars, because like they always got good actors to show up in these things. Peter Cushing was in all of them. The last one was 1974's Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell. You've got David Prowse playing the monster. He, of course, was the body for Darth Vader. You've got also in the cast, you've got Bernard Lee from the James Bond franchise. Um, and
So many
Patrick
connections.
Troughton, the second Doctor from Doctor Who, shows up as a body snatcher in this thing. Madeline Smith. Um, so even when they're kind of on their creaky last legs of this, this run of films for them, they were still attracting some decent talent and known, character actors, from
Right.
England.
And the character actors went on to as kind of senior members of film, film societies, went on to lend their weight and credibility to things like Star Wars. Peter Cushing as Grand Moff Tarkin leads it makes him. It gave Star Wars a little bit of life when it needed life. When Lucas could walk into a room and go, "I have Peter Cushing. I have Alec Guinness. Give me a little leeway and some money, and we can make a movie." It's not lost on me that those things actually happen. So, but the franchise viability is amazing because would you lump them all in though, Rich? Like, I think you can lump them all in as, you know what I mean? Like, and you look at all the filmmakers they've touched. You figure Guillermo del Toro, Scorsese, Tim Burton. You kind of go down the list, and you realize that they're like, if you don't see things in this movie that you might see in, I don't know, Sweeney Todd, or that you might see in, I don't know, Sleepy Hollow, because there's so many things in this movie where you come up and the franchise viability, you realize that this movie is the movie that started it all for this company, and this company goes on to touch generations and waves of filmmakers.
Yeah, we are gonna touch on some other seminal works from Hammer, but this is the text from all of that stuff that sprung forward, and then successive waves of horror that we have today.
Well,
I don't think it's impossible to understate or overstate the importance of this movie in the overall history of horror cinema,
franchise, right?
British cinema, what have you.
But and like you said, when we made the picks, right, the two that jumped to the top of any list is this movie, right, and then what we have next week coming up, which is this movie. And like I said, the interesting thing that you get from this is that they start using like Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, and they're back, but they're not playing the same things, and they're very close together timeline wise. So it becomes this amazingly wonderful self-fulfilling prophecy that basically it's very much got like a feel to it where it's like, we're gonna start a studio and we're gonna have a blast and we're gonna drag everybody along with us. And that's the other thing. One thing we didn't touch upon in production and in the history, Cushing and Lee could not have gotten along better as friends in life or on film. And one of the stories you always hear Peter Cushing and Lee talking about when they did the old timey, I've seen some interviews with them. They both love Looney Tunes cartoons. They both love Bugs Bunny. And so when they would get on set, they would talk about whatever Bugs Bunny cartoon they had watched the morning that they were working. And after that, they were friends for life until Peter Cushing, passed away first. You know what I mean? Like, they were friends until, that happened.
Friends to the end.
And friends to the end. And the idea that that their films stand the test of time and are a testament to the friendship, because again, when you watch Victor and the creature in this movie, the physical sequences are bone chilling. The sequences where he's barking orders at him are bone chilling. You know what I mean? Like, it really works. A couple comments as we finish up. Joe said, "Yeah, we already saw that one." Let me see. David Howard Thornton, I would love to see you on an episode of this show on our network. Art and Terrifier were brought up multiple times. That is true. I would like to talk to David Howard Thornton because I think a lot of his movement as Art the Clown is very, very based on old-timey movies. That is an interesting get. That would be interesting for us. Would like to see original Frankenstein monster awaken in today's world.
Okay. I would say any story about AI is kind of a modern Frankenstein story.
Modern
That's either
Prometheus.
Blade Runner, Spielberg's AI, or Creator, which is just out now in theaters. They're all very much, like you said, modern Prometheus stories. And I would
say also legacy wise, right, Rich? When you look at this, the second time around with the creature, after he's kind of been beaten down a little bit, Victor's kind of had his way with him, and he's a little bit weaker. There are a lot of modern interpretations where the Frankenstein monster is kind of, and the one I'm thinking about is the Monster Squad, right? He's definitely very more sympathetic. And if you think about like that moment when they're in the Monster Squad clubhouse where he sees the picture of what he looks like, you know, what the classic plastic mask looks like, and he just, you know, he doesn't, you know, he always comes. Frankenstein monsters as they progressed are like, you know, the evil thing is not the creature. The evil thing is the creator of the creature, and like it's one of those. So I think you can see it awakening in today's world. They're usually sympathetic. You know, like it's usually a sympathetic thing.
Yeah, and it's usually, you know, and then it becomes a reaction of, you know, the public fear of the unknown, fear of, you know, somebody who's strange or different, and fear of somebody because they look different, and that you know has some obvious political allegory that the filmmakers could also use too, which I don't think I've ever really seen kind of developed in a Frankenstein movie now. And
hasn't been done right
off the top of my head, so it's kind of like I'm just kind of working this out as the words are spilling out of my head. So
well, no, but I mean, you know, we've had so many. There's a lot to be had.
I think there's a lot of potential for a Frankenstein in the modern day type story, even if it is, you know, a reanimated corpse story and not like artificial intelligence through a computer or something like that.
I think one of the things that I also picked up watching this movie was, and this is I say this with all respect to every filmmaker that's tried to do a Frankenstein movie, they're mostly bummer films. Like there's not, when you look at it, Rich, like the modern Frankenstein movies, like we've had 100 Dracula movies, 100, you know, 100 like that character translates, 100 interpretations of the character. We had 2 last year, but they're not a lot of Frankenstein movies, and mostly because it's so heady and it's real hard to not. It's a real heady issue because it's a God complex, and God complexes are kind of reserved now for like medical thrillers, or you know what I mean. Like it's a weird thing.
Dracula stories, vampire stories are at their best, at their core, stories about sexual awakening.
Yes.
Whereas these, you know, which is a very certain, I don't want to say earthy, but visceral type of a theme. Whereas this deals with something much loftier about hubris, mankind, you know, playing God, things like that. These are, you know, much different types of themes, and you can have, you know, you can have a story about that, but those stories are invariably going to require someone have a fall from that position of pride, and that doesn't make for an fun first date movie ending. So
when I think a lot of the Frankenstein movies have become, like you were saying, Blade Runner, AI, allegories with you know, creations trying to find their god, their gods.
Their creator.
You know, Roy Batty can be seen as a Frankenstein figure. He is just trying to meet his maker. Do you know what I mean? So, you know, I think Frankenstein has kind of gotten enveloped by the sci-fi kind of occasion of horror in some ways. And like I said, we had 2 Dracula movies last year, and I have yet to see a modern Frankenstein. I think you should copy this. Like I came out of this going, if you copy this, you would have a ton of people going, "That's amazing." Ken writes, I like Cushing as Quartermass. Quartermass was definitely on our list of things we might want to talk about. Dracula 1979 and Last Voyage of the Minotaur are similar. Yes, that's the interesting thing. I think Rich hits onto something where Frankenstein is much loftier. The idea of playing God or trying to find your version of God in yourself. And Dracula is just a really hot guy that's going after chicks and biting necks. And
But
he's,
I will
I think it's a little bit easier to adapt.
Yeah, I will say in Last Voyage of the Demeter, there is an interesting, religious theme in there of, are we being, have we been cursed? Are we in hell? Are we being subjugated to a
Purgatory,
punishment?
yeah.
Yeah, because, this thing is here. Was this our fault? Which I think is an interesting theme that the movie doesn't quite really explore all that much, but I'm grateful that it at least is kind of there, and one character expresses these ideas.
Right, the you're talking about the cook who's
Yeah.
profoundly religious and just kind of, maybe we signed up for this, maybe we deserve it, kind of.
Yeah.
But I think, I think it's a real interesting. I think it's a harder film that, like, I know that we had Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and it was like, it's a messy movie. We had The Bride, wasn't great. Like, almost all the modern recent interpretations of Frankenstein have been a bit of a mess. So when we get the one, hopefully it's going to look like Curse of Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And next week we got a real treat because you get to see these guys. They both get to talk next week, so that's a big deal. Yeah,
That's
they
a good
both
step.
they both get to chat. We have Horror of Dracula next week. Part of our, actually not next week, the 16th, I should say. I'm sorry, we're off next week. Horror of Dracula on the 16th, not next week. Sorry, I have issues. Where can people find you, Rich, if they want to find you? Where can they find your Film Buff Online stuff that's dropping tomorrow about this Monty Python?
All of my writing is at filmbuffonline.com. We have a Facebook page which can keep you up to date on stories as they drop. We also have a lot of history posts on the Facebook page. If you kind of like film history and TV history, we mix that up in there. I have another podcast that I do with my good friend Natasha Bogutsky. It's called The Big Picture Podcast. It's at bigpicturepod.com. Our latest episode, we actually talked about an older Betty Davis movie called Now Voyager. That came out last week. And I'm on Twitter at FilmBuffRich, and also on Blue Sky at FilmBuffRich. And if you're looking to see me in person, you might see me wandering around the halls of the Javits Center next Thursday, Friday, and Saturday at New York Comic Con. I'm skipping Sunday, sorry. But if you see me there, just feel free to stop me, say hello. I'd love to meet anybody who's been watching our show.
Okay, so JW the Movie Guy on Instagram, JW the Movie Guy on Facebook. Also do a little show called Loud Nerdy on Tuesday nights. We have a Loud Nerdy group, which is really great. A little under 800 people, like-minded individuals. We have some polls up. We're going to be doing some horror themed stuff for the rest of the year, rest of October. You can also find me on Blue Sky at JW the Movie Guy.
Yes, I just saw that you you just started that up.
So I am also on Blue Sky now, because I can't see myself paying for anything that I used to get for free. So anyway, that's gonna happen where I need to be somewhere else, talking about movies. But you can also find us every Monday night, talking about movies and doing whatever. You can find all of our shows on YouTube, and you can find them on Facebook and on the Indie Escape Network Facebook page.
And if I can, I'd like to slide in a plug for my friend Joel Meadows. He's the editor-in-chief of Tripwire magazine from England. They've been around for over 30 years doing great British comedy journalism, great British comics journalism, comic book journalism. And they're doing a panel at New York Comic Con on Thursday morning at 10:45. So I will definitely be there for that because he actually asked me to film it for him.
That's amazing.
But I would recommend.
We're hitting cons along the coast.
Feel free to check out that.
Well, and like I said, thank you for joining us. Next week we got the horror of Dracula.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. Sorry, not next week. I made a mistake again. Let's see. when is Natasha and her panel coming back on? It's in the works. I will say it's in the works. There are several things that are going to happen with them. One of which may be the Monster Squad, because it was really funny in the green room after the Porky's episode. A lot of them were on board with watching the Monster Squad. I don't think Natasha was, but we're gonna make her watch it. Why not? And then Joe writes, "Awesome episode." Thank you, Joe. You always say that though, so I don't know if Joe means it's an awesome episode or if it's just him being really nice to us. But thank you for joining us tonight.
Episode.
It's us. Although I did think it was really original today. Like with that opening is like we're gonna start doing crafty things. But thank you for joining us tonight. Go watch a Hammer horror film. I'm trying to watch one new horror film a day during October. I have to catch something in a little bit before I miss tonight. But I watched Terrifier 1 October 1st because everybody said I needed to see it, and I did. I was mad he cheated. He used the gun. I was like, what is going on? But anyway, I guess I'm stuck in my slasher ways. But have a great night. Thank you for joining us. Go watch a Hammer horror film. Horror of Dracula, available on Vudu and a bunch of other places. You can watch it for next week. Only $5. You spend 2 weeks. I'm so sorry. October 16th.